Great. Well, thank you for everyone who's joining this evening. And thank you to everyone who's been such a great part of this journey, especially Nadia and Rajib, who invited me in to learn about the amazing context of Bangladesh, Sajid and Ruxmini, who teach me so much every day, and all of the artists that really, make what we do such a pleasure. So if I'm speaking too fast, please make a comment in the chat box and Ruxmini can tell me to slow down. I tend to speak very quickly. But this is kind of a presentation to talk about, I guess, how I think as a curator and kind of how each moment of each summit that I worked on. So I'm not going to talk about the 2012 summit because I wasn't a part of it, but I'll talk about kind of ideas that flowed through from my time to 2014 to where we are now. So some quotes that I think about a lot are like this idea of we build tomorrow, right? Which is something we're all doing here together, even being on this call, right? Like we're spending time building towards something that we don't know what it is. And to build something, it takes practice. So when I think about artistic practice, it's also in our curatorial practice, it's also interesting to think about it from like a dance or a sports perspective. It's something you have to do every day. It's something that's a ritual, and it's something where you're kind of working towards something or some kind of idea of a standard that maybe you haven't reached yet. And there's an incredible, so it's a Black Zen philosopher. Her name is Angel Kyoto Williams. And I love her idea that the world is our field of practice, right? So it's, we're practicing of how to be in and of this world. And Elizabeth Pavanelli, who was one of our keynote speakers at Daca Art Summit 2020, I like this statement that she says, if your thoughts weren't practice, so if you don't put the things in your head into practice, then it wasn't really a thought and it wasn't really a practice. So how do you implement this practice that you're working on? And the other one that I love is imagination is a muscle that we need to exercise, right? So that idea of being able to dream, that idea of being able to build something that's not here yet, the idea of, there's universes far beyond what we could have imagined. And how do we, how do we consider imagination as a skill that's as important as a hard skill like doing math or knowing how to be an engineer, right? I think imagination and the use of imagination is something that's really undervalued in everyday life. And so that's why I love working in the arts, because anything is possible in that sense. So when we think about practicing, I've kind of been practicing my whole life. So some of you know this, but like I originally wanted to be a ballerina. So I spent basically every day of my youth going to ballet practice. And if my parents ever took me on vacation, I would freak out because I wouldn't be able to go to class. And it's interesting, I'm a failed ballerina. It didn't work for me, but William Forsythe, whose work you enjoyed at Daca Art Summit 2020, is like the foremost choreographer in the field of ballet. He's the best. There's not a better living choreographer. And so while I might have not been able to work with him as a dancer, it was incredible to get him excited about Bangladesh and be able to work with him in our context. But again, it's that practice and that understanding of dance and movement that primes a lot of the things that I do. So I'm very interested in performance. I'm very interested in how bodies move through space. And one place you could have seen that in Daca Art Summit 2020 was this moment in the Mazhar Islam show, which I co-curated with Sean Anderson and with Noor Khan, was this moment where you had to roll through this William Forsythe piece into a film by Hajar Wahid, which was about the form of a spiral. So some people might have cut that link between spiraling and the ideas in the film, but these are two artists that probably would have not been put together in the same context. They're completely different generations from completely different other parts of the world. But again, with imagination and with this kind of practice, it was incredible, at least for me, to put these together. So if there was one moment in the summit that was my kind of favorite curatorial pairing, it would have been this one. And also, this piece, it's called, the William Forsythe piece, is called A Volume Beneath Which It Is Not Possible for Certain Classes of Action to Arise, right? So we have limitations. Right now we're really limited with COVID-19, but our bodies and our minds need to find new ways of navigating through this. And so, you know, I felt like that period of time between 2018 and 2020, when the summit was being developed, was a time where there were protests and injustice and kind of clampdowns on freedom all over the world. Yet people, creative people, find ways to work through that. So this piece was very much a part of that feeling. Other things with dance and performance. So I also work on, I worked on the 2018 and 2019 versions of the Frieze Artist Award in London. And in 2019, we got to commission a new piece of choreography by a Polish artist named Alex Baczynski-Jenkins. And it's actually really difficult to commission performance pieces. And the reason for that is you have to pay for all the rehearsal time. You have to pay for the rehearsal space. You have to, you know, working with bodies is very different working with materials. I mean, people who have worked with choreographers or theater directors can tell you that, but it's a very different skill set. And I think that we've seen a lot, our performance has kind of grown with the summit. And I was really thrilled with our Kora Krit Aronchai performance that happened in Dhaka that many of you might have seen. But it was interesting that by turning the lights off at 7 p.m., we could turn an exhibition space into a stage because it became like basically the entire space changed just by the way we dealt with the lighting and the way that we, I guess through the programming transformed what one might have seen as an exhibition into a platform for a performance. So we were able to do it for 2 days. Very happy we were able to do that. I don't know the next time that we'll be able to have that many people together like that. But, and the piece was called Together. And this is for me a highlight of my Daca Art Summit experience. So I guess biographically, I'm American, you can hear my accent, but I come from, or my family comes from a very small place in a tiny little island called Guam. So you see here, Guam is near the Philippines, Guam is near Japan. It is absolutely nowhere near the United States. It's at least a 13-hour journey. It is nowhere near. And it's targeted by North Korea and other kind of Asian superpowers because it's actually one of the last 17 colonies left in the world. And it's, so its kind of tagline is where America's day begins because the date line begins here. What's interesting is while people in Guam are born, you can have an American passport, you can't vote for president, but the president can choose to send you to war. So more people are drafted or join the military out of Guam than any single United States. So when I learned about the East Pakistan era of Bangladesh, it really resonated with me. Like, how could a country that didn't speak the same language was a flight sources of a place that they're not from? And also with language, the indigenous language was outlawed in schools. So most people don't really remember it. Like my mother wasn't allowed to speak it in school. Now it's okay, but like that time, so it's kind of a generation that's wiped out. Also in our culture, so I was covered here. Okay, here we go. So banyan tree. So when I look at the work of work that come back is that we American are coming from a very place is near 100,000 left of this culture. And so when I think about struggles that Bangladesh went through, it gives me hope that maybe one day my people can find freedom in the way that Bangladesh did. Let's see, next slide. Okay, so I'll answer a question that people ask me all the time, but so why so many foreign artists? Like, so it's kind of like Guam where no one knows where that is. When Nadia and Rajib started the Daca Art Summit, and I was an international curator at the time, I didn't know anything about Bangladeshi art. If you ask people about Bangladeshi art when it came to South Asia, you know, it didn't really have, there wasn't much information about it. And I just found, so we'll go through it over time, like, because I think each edition we've had more, it has become a more and more Bangladeshi platform. And I've been working with more and more Bangladeshi artists. I think you guys are among the best in the world. I'm looking forward to working with a lot of you again in the future. But it was really about trying to create a context where people from other parts of the world that might have only read about Rana Plaza or only read about the concert for Bangladesh could understand that their histories connect into Bangladesh. And so my life from 2013 until like February was just traveling all the time. So I found this in my diary. This was my itinerary from 2018 November until October, or this is my plan. I made this in November, but I was in the Philippines, then I was in Sylhet, then I was in Dubai, then I was in Australia, then I was in Bangladesh, then I was in Brussels. But it was this kind of constant move to like make connections with what I was learning with in Bangladesh and draw new collaborators into our family. And it keeps growing. And I think it's wonderful. I love seeing when people go for residencies, the new friends that they meet, or people who made new connections in Bangladesh and how those ripple out in the world. Life will be very different for all of us now that we're more static. I'm excited about that. But my kind of experience was this very all over the place thing, trying to draw connections and bring in collaborators for what we were doing in Dhaka. So to kind of walk through the summit and also how, so it was also trying to place like, how do you see Bangladesh relative to the rest of the world? So when I started working on the summit for the 2014 edition, it was very much about creating a South Asia conversation within, with Dhaka as the kind of epicenter. Bangladesh is the epicenter. And so I was living in India at the time. I lived in India from 2010 until 2016. And it was interesting because most of our foreign visitors were from India. There were a lot of Indian artists, but it was still this kind of feeling that, Bangladesh was like a smaller cousin of India. And that was something that I saw was a problem, and we'll see how that develops as we move forward. But so what I tried to do curatorially with the solo projects that I commissioned was to show these connections between and across countries. So this project has shown a lot of places all over the world. It was by Shilpa Gupta, and she was looking at Chitmahal, so these enclaves of India within Bangladesh and Bangladesh within India, these kind of exception spots along borders. And it was really interesting to just see, again, these histories of countries that like one day someone decided to draw a line and you ended up living in another country. Or with Nepal, I loved this project with Sharon Sherpa. So he was looking, so Atisha was from East Bengal and heavily influenced Tibetan Buddhism. So Sharon Sherpa was so excited to make work for Bangladesh because Bangladesh or that area really inspired his spirituality. So it was also about, and at this point, like I had visited Bangladesh, I think for the first time in maybe March or April 2014. So I was very new to Bangladesh when we were working on the summit, and that was for a variety of factors. We might recall that there were, 2013. So February, it was March, April 2013, but there were protests around the elections, and I was new. So I didn't, my entry point, I think the Bangladeshi artists I knew personally were Mahbub and Lipi. And so when I look back at this summit, it's interesting to just see, the things I learned or how my perspectives changed as I spent more time in Bangladesh. This project I also loved, and this was something where we started to discover the power of production or what we can do in Bangladesh, because a lot of people were complaining, oh, you don't have projectors, oh, you don't have this, you don't have that, but actually there's amazing craft in Bangladesh. There's a lot of things that are possible in Bangladesh, like Correa's performance, that would not be possible for a Western museum to do. So Rana is from Sylhet, but she left when she was very young and she hadn't had a major show in Bangladesh. We couldn't ship those, kind of large-scale aluminium sculptures that she's known for. And so she had the challenge of trying to make something locally. And this piece, just called number 473. So when she makes work, she numbers them by the order in which they were made. This was made out of, I think, 1,200 handmade baskets. And this work actually put her on, even though she was a Bangladeshi artist working in London, she hadn't had major museum shows. And this show and this piece in Bangladesh really put her on the map. And it was also this understanding that by creating these unique contexts where you can match an artist, a possibility, and a public like this can create transformative moments in people's careers. And for Rana, this really was one. But it also sadly speaks to kind of the structuralized racism of the art world, because Rana lives in London. She's British. And it's actually, we've worked really hard on this together that, she's from Bangladesh, but, you can't box her in that kind of box. So it was by her being seen in Bangladesh that suddenly she was getting opportunities in London. And now I share this because we're very happy that she's the first Bangladeshi member of the Royal Academy. So now she's also respected as a British artist. But the Bangladesh experience was very much part of that journey. So after the 2014 summit, so this was an example of a Bangladeshi artist reconnecting with their roots. But there's actually a lot of Western artists. We can also think of people like Catherine Masood, whose home is in Bangladesh, who, you know, might have been transformed by their time in South Asia. So there might be artists of South Asian blood in London that have never even been to South Asia that will be invited to South Asian shows. But there might be Western artists who lived in South Asia that will never be invited to a South Asian show because of the color of their skin. And I don't like that idea. So I decided let's look at transnationality. So 2016, DAS 2016 really looked at transnational practices, but from many levels, right? So if we look at someone like Rashid Chowdhury, his time in France and in Madrid really formed his work as a Bangladeshi artist. So we started to, while it was still a South Asia platform, look at these other connections. It was really a pleasure to work with this legendary American artist, Linda Benglis, and a lot of people don't know this, but her life partner was Indian. She has a studio in Ahmedabad, and the colors and forms many of them are inspired by her time in India. So she made us a new series of paper sculptures. Some of these look like trunks of elephants. Some of them kind of look like sari folds. The family was in the textile industry. But, you know, also as the reputation of the summit started to build, as people could see that artists like Linda Benglis like wanted to be a part of it, and they wanted to be a part of it because they never had an opportunity for local audiences from places that inspired their work to be able to engage with it. So Linda is an example of someone who is American, she's Greek American, but who chose South Asia as a place that she wanted to live part of her life. You also have artists like Tino Segal, so we're not allowed to show pictures of this because you're not supposed to photograph or video it, but Tino is half Indian. Like now where his dad's from would be Pakistan, but it's something that's in his blood, but a lot of people don't know. There are ideas of that and of Eastern spirituality that find their way in his work, but it's not shown in our context. And so we showed this amazing piece called Anne Lee that was activated by 5 young Bangladeshi girls who embody this anime character that's set free. And so she asks existential questions like, would you rather be busy or not busy enough? Which I think in COVID times, very interesting question. But the reason that piece curatorially was in the show was that I felt like South Asia right now, it's in a time like, you know, generations are shifting, and learning how to be an individual outside of your family or outside of traditional family structures is a struggle. Then we also, in Nada Raza's beautiful show, The Missing One, had these bookworks by the Sri Lanka-based Belgian artist Saskia Pintalan. I love her work, but, you know, she lives in Sri Lanka, but she doesn't get to show in South Asian context. She was also showing in DAS 2020 this time. You might have seen some of the absurd newspaper works in the Feminist Futures Gallery. We also realized, so Daca Art Summit 2014 was very much a contemporary art platform, but contemporary art doesn't exist in a vacuum. Like Bangladesh has had an extremely vibrant art scene for a long time. So we also wanted to create a platform for people to learn about Bangladesh's art history. So this show Rewind, which Beth Citron, Sabi Ahmed, and Amara Antilla and I worked on, and some of these characters have recurred in other summits. So I like to kind of, rather than like burning things down and starting something new, I'd like to kind of build the family of collaborators. And, you know, it's great because these people love Bangladesh and it's always going to be a part of their reference points. But for example, these works by Shafuddin Ahmed, like he studied in London. He also studied in Calcutta. So I think it's important, like rather when we look at South Asia, you can't look at it geographically that way. There's all these other points that come in. And also these works in the back, these shadowgrams by Naomi Milani, these were made when she was in Paris. And it's interesting because these works have been, since the summit, have been acquired by MoMA and by Tate. So it's also been interesting to see the summit grow as a research platform where people get to see art in a different context and start to reconsider it. Let's see, next slide. This was also, so I showed you the solo projects from DAS 2014. I was very new to Bangladesh. So the solo projects with Bangladeshi artists were with Mahbub, Lippi, Rana, but who is, again, British also, and with Naeem. So most of those names are pretty established. So it was that time I spent between 2014 and 2016 when I started to learn much more about emerging Bangladeshi practices and wanted to give a platform for these artists to show work in the country in a way that maybe they hadn't been able to before. And we also realized that people were not going to travel all the way to Bangladesh to see work that they could see anywhere else. So this kind of process of commissioning or debuting new work became very much a part of the heart or mandate of what we did at DAS. So the project on the top left was with Shuvo, where he was looking at a Bangladeshi a man that was tortured in Guantanamo. And so you had these VR goggles and these headphones, you were kind of thrown into the space of shaking someone out of their senses. Aisha Sultana's beautiful haptic project, I think the kind of textures that she gets in her paperwork kind of came to life in this environment, and you felt it as you walked over these tiles in this space. And also this idea of giving artists like a space to inhabit. As we know, there's not many exhibition spaces that are permanently open like this in Dhaka. So we're very happy to use the Shilpakala Academy, but there was a lot of construction, which we'll get into construction later, but to build these rooms, to get the lighting systems. But yeah, again, this was a start of trying to spend my time working more with emerging figures like, Shafuddin Ahmed. There haven't been many major, at Bengal Foundation there have been, but there haven't been many major exhibitions of his work. Or at this point, Shumo and Aisha or Mona Mwasif, they weren't exhibiting so much internationally. So to kind of be there at a key point where you see that this is a key point in someone's career where other opportunities can open up. So for us, it's really a pleasure, and we're really grateful that, artists trust us as part of this journey. Let's see, next slide. Okay, so here's Rashid Chowdhury with Monica Correa. Also wonderful that some of these works are in MoMA's collection now. But the point is to be able to make these connections of artists who are working in similar ways at similar times but might have not met. And that's something that is also from an art historical perspective quite interesting. Let's see, why do I have this in here? I guess I just want to talk about also exhibition design. So this was the first time we kind of had a professional exhibition designer working with us. They came up with this kind of foot motif for the walls that kind of made this snake-like gallery in Rewind. And so we'll get to exhibition design a bit later, but how to, not have to use straight walls or play around back to movement and the dance thing, play around with the ways that people navigate space. Okay, this is also why I'm showing the slides. After Daca Art Summit 2014, I'm not speaking for myself, I'm sure Sajjad will also agree with this, I know Nadia and Rajib agree with this, we went through major depression because, you worked on this big thing and then what do you do next? So for Daca Art Summit 2016, I decided that was not happening, so I flew straight to Japan and threw myself into another project. So I went to Japan thinking that I would study SM Sultan's time in Fukuoka. Turns out he didn't spend that time. But while I was looking through the files, I found this amazing photo of Sayan Jehangir, like may he rest in peace, looking really cool with some bell bottoms and sunglasses with a Rashid Chowdhury tapestry that looks very similar to this one. And it was so interesting. So this is from 1980 to see that the kind of work we are trying to do at Daca Art Summit is very similar to the kind of work that he was trying to do in 1980. Syed Jehangir was also traveling all over the world with little catalogs, and he would tell these stories about how he'd have a little catalog about the emerging artists from Bangladesh, and then he would have a bottle of whiskey and he would sit with people and tell them how amazing Bangladesh was. But the point is, I was fascinated by, at this time, how Bangladesh could have the first biennial that it has the oldest continually existing biennial in Asia. And the first editions were pretty mind-blowing in terms of the checklist and who was involved and how this movement was built. And I was very inspired by it. So this comes up later with DAS 2018 when we had a show about the Asian Art Biennial. Ruxmini was pivotal in that, in the sense of finding these works that we had seen that had shown in Fukuoka and had shown in those early biennials. But also I've just found it fascinating that the best photo archive I could find of, normal time is how next are built. So you can see Jehangir touring houses in Japan, and he's with a artist and curator named Ray Albano from the Philippines, who was a really important figure there. And so you can see this friendship of someone in the Philippines and someone in Bangladesh who are both institution builders in a library in Japan. So that was just, again, interesting, where sometimes when you're looking for something, it's not in the straightforward place. So also in 2016, I had the opportunity to curate a show in Vienna with many emerging Bangladeshi artists. So this was also interesting to kind of try to change the way people perceive Bangladesh, but via a younger generation. So this image here was by kind of an endless column by Rafale Shuvo that was made out of flatbreads from the Turkish shop around the corner. But he was also trying to talk about the immigrant experience. Many of you, I'm sure, were on the call, were in the show, but it was this was kind of the beginning of a lot of, interest of festivals and institutions, both commercial and non-commercial, to learn about this scene of what was happening in Bangladesh. And I think these invitations were also very encouraging for all of us, that there are platforms to share this story, and not necessarily with artists that were already established, but ones that were, again, part of a journey, moving towards something, practicing towards something. At this time, I was also concurrently running an art foundation in the Philippines. So Aisha, Sultana, and Nabil Rahman got to come here as residents. But this was the last show I did there of an American artist, a dead American artist named Bruce Connor. And so this is a video called Operation Crossroads that was made with the footage of the nuclear tests in Bikini Island. But I was commuting between the Bangladesh and the Philippines, which was very difficult because it's not an easy commute. It's at least 13 hours with middle of the night flights, mostly with migrant workers. But going between Southeast Asia and South Asia, I started to see these very strong connections that weren't talked about, because Southeast Asia is centered in Singapore and South Asia is centered in India. And they all have their own networks and they don't really cross over. And so I saw this kind of potential for a dialogue that could be interesting. And Tarun Nagesh, who many of you have met and worked with, made a comment that really stuck with me, that he found that the art scene in Bangladesh was far more similar to Indonesia, where I was just talking, than it was to India. And I completely agree with him. Why? It's because artists build collaborative initiative structure. It's not work member work much more individual. This was also the Rohingya crisis was obviously happening at the time. It had been happening for a while, but you just see the problems with these bottlenecks where you think, okay, so Myanmar, for example, we've been showing artists from Myanmar since 2014, when Mahbub curated Hitian Lin into his performance section. Myanmar, in some definitions, is included in South Asia. In some definitions, it's included in Southeast Asia, but that's the kind of in-between line that's very interesting, or as these rivers cross this muddy space. So DAS 2018, where DAS 2016 was looking at transnational lines, DAS 2018 was looking at these bleeds across regions. And also, it was really hard at a certain point to get from Bombay to Dhaka. And why? I think it was because the flights became super expensive. They were between $800 and $1,000, and I was trying to figure out why this was. And I love flight path maps. I'm sure this is outdated now. None of these are ancient relics now. But if you notice, Biman flies more places in Southeast Asia and in the Arab world than it does in South Asia. At that point, it only flew to Calcutta and Kathmandu. That's crazy. So actually, if you wanted to look at connectivity, South Asia was not the connecting point we needed to look at. And it was also interesting to see in DAS 2014, Pakistanis could travel without a visa, was not a problem. But these kind of restrictions kept boxing in more and more. And it was interesting to see, okay, what flows of people are open and what flows of people are closed. So you started to see these kind of connections. So this work by Kamruzaman, where he was, there were women that were stitching together clothes that were left behind by Rohingya refugees and trafficked people into Southeast Asia was a big highlight on one side. And then on the other side, you had this work by Jakai Siributir from Thailand, who was creating these flags of imagined countries out of debris found on either side of the river where the Thai Rohingya crisis was. Then we also have these works on the right by a young Afghan artist of Bamiyan origin. So that's something I should also say. like indigeneity and minority cultures have been streaming throughout every single Daca Art Summit. Even one of the artists in the DAS 2012, one of the artists of the Samdani Art Award was of indigenous heritage. So it's something that, you know, again, it's personally of interest to me, but to show that like a country has many different voices and many different cultures. So Amin Tasha had to flee Afghanistan after a Documenta workshop because he was doing something on the Book of Kings, which comes from his minority background, and the Taliban was claiming that he was doing something counter-religious. So he had to flee the country. He went to Indonesia. He now speaks fluent Indonesian, has an Indonesian wife, which that's a beautiful story. But the work is about these cross sections of, you know, how did those Buddhas end up in Bamiyan? Like, how did that happen? So these works were looking at kind of the travel of the Silk Road between East and South Asia and East Asia. So I also brought poets into the summit this time. I loved working with the Bangladeshi Migrant Poets Society in Singapore. And it was really interesting that the director of the National Gallery of Singapore came to Daca Art Summit, which was wonderful, but he didn't have a speaking role. The Singaporeans had the speaking role were the poets. And that was also really interesting to see how we can play with who gets the stage, whose voice gets to be heard. And so this work by Charles Lim, Sea State 6, is looking at kind of the plight of Bangladeshi migrant workers who are working below the water on different mining and infrastructure projects. And I'm sure you guys have all read about how difficult these guys have had, difficult time these guys have had in Singapore with confinement and COVID-19. Here on the right, we had an incredible piece, which you might remember, by Hotsu Nayen, our tiger project. But in the way that where tigers and these kind of shape-shifting figures that move between man and animal exist in Southeast Asian mythology, they exist in South Asian mythology too. So it's interesting to, again, try to draw these parallels and say, actually, you can't box off cultural references. Like South Asia is mostly countries that were former British colonies. Southeast Asia is a Cold War term. Cultures were mixing in far more complicated ways for a very long time. And I think bringing these contexts together was really a great thing to do. Then we had Cosmin Kostinas' beautiful traveling exhibition, A Beast, a God, and a Line, that we commissioned and produced along with MoMA Warsaw, Parasite, and then it also toured to TS1 in Yangon. So imagine, this is the largest contemporary art show that's ever happened in Myanmar to date, and to Konsel Trondheim, which is an art space in Norway, and it'll soon travel to Chiang Mai. But the point is that Cosmin was trying, again, to look at these circulations of ideas, be they religious, be they cultural, but via textiles, because languages change, religions change, politics change, but weaving patterns change far more slowly. So you might recognize Sarat Malachakma's weavings back here. This is an artist, the image on the left with the fire is an Austrian artist, Ines Dujak. But the point is, we could not make a show like this if we weren't working with these other institutions, because the budget of the show kind of spiraled out of control. And by having all these different people contribute, we were able to make something so much bigger than we could have done if we did it on our own. And so this idea of kind of building a global network of collaborators, that it's not like my first Daca Art Summit where like I came there and I didn't know what I was doing. Cosmin came as a jury member to DAS 2016. Like, we kind of tried to set up these relationships so that they continue. And now Cosmin is working on the Kathmandu Triennial. His time in Bangladesh was very formative to that. So it's kind of, yeah, it's building kind of a global, deep think tank of people who are committed to maintaining their inspiration and relationships with Bangladesh. Then, of course, this piece that we are all very proud of, Ritu Satyar's Lost Tune. So similar thing, like, so a lot of my other work, like while I love being a curator, in most museums, there's someone different that's doing the fundraising and the partnerships than's doing the curating. But here in Bangladesh, the only way I can curate what I want to do is by also doing that other side. So it's actually, it's very interesting. It's like, for me, it's building something. I like building things, and I like building things with other people. But we invited in a curator named Vali Maluji, who made an exhibition, which was meant to be a historical show, looking at the Festival of Art Shiraz Persepolis, which kind of like Daca Art Summit happened in an unexpected place, created these transnational moments. But while history remembers the famous Western figures, most of the figures were from South or Southeast Asia or Africa. So we're revisiting this, and then we had this idea to kind of bring a live stage into the summit. And Ritu had done this piece at the Asian Art Biennial, which I loved, and I introduced it to Vali. And then, you know, we kind of came up with this idea. So again, lots of different people's ideas. It's Ritu's work, though, in the end, to restage this in a new form, but also in a stage that could adapt to other things, be it film screenings, be it other pieces. So like Nupur had a piece, or there was a sound piece by Hassan Khan. But this again was only possible because of a partnership with the Liverpool Biennial. And that partnership with the Liverpool Biennial was only possible because of this crazy traveling all over the place. So all of these things of being rooted in Bangladesh were also tied to being unrooted from home. And so this piece, we are very much looking forward to seeing it at MoMA, and we never thought in our wildest dreams when Daca Art Summit started that an artist, an emerging artist from Bangladesh would be able to have this kind of platform. So again, and what this speaks to is just that the talent of artists in Bangladesh, you guys are extremely talented. It's not like it's a big gallery marketing you. It's not like that, you know, it's the work. And that's what I really love about working in Dhaka, is that it's not about the brand of the work, it's the work itself. There's not other stuff around it. And when you see it in Dhaka, you understand the context from where it's coming from. So we also were building, like I talked about Rewind and pulling in modern art to DAS 2016. We also realized that there's a lot of scholarship and thinking that needs to happen. And in the way that we brought artists together, let's bring writers together, let's bring thinkers together, let's bring people together that might not meet. And so I won't dwell on this for too long because I don't want the talk to go for too long, but here we have one of the first big meetings of Indigenous curators and writers that came from Canada, from Australia, from South Asia, from Taiwan. Like, it was amazing to have all of these people together, and they keep collaborating. And I love that our hub for this was in Dhaka, which is kind of an unexpected thing. Of course, we all remember Gayatri Spivak's talk, and I'm going to talk about the Mahasa program briefly, but the Mahasa program, which was our modern art histories in and across Africa, South and Southeast Asia, which was was led by Iftikhar Dadi, and I should say the critical writing ensembles was led by Katia Garcia Anton. It was something that was only possible because we did this Scholars Weekend in DAS 2018. So it's like everything is practicing towards something else. Because we were able to do a smaller scale series of art historical symposia, bigger forces had an interest and trusted us to kind of grow to the next level. So again, all of this talk is like how things grow. So this was incredible. Look how nice Ruxmini looks with her sunglasses here, and look at Sanjoy with this peace sign. So also imagine that this is the last person that landed from this program, who is Andrew Malenga. Where is Andrew Malenga in this picture? Oh, here he is. So he's the guy like with the bald head behind Ruxmini. He came from Zambia, and he was the last flight before the airport shut down because of the protests. So it's unbelievable that we were able to get this done in August of 2019. But here we have all of these scholars from all over the world who are starting to think about their histories without putting America or Europe in the middle, and trying to think about, okay, how might modern art histories in Ethiopia and modern art histories in Bangladesh be connected? And not meeting in a library in Oxford, but actually meeting at the Asia Art Archive in Hong Kong and meeting in Dhaka at the summit. And so this is something I think we're all very proud of, and we won't see the results of this probably for another 20 years. But hopefully, you know, if we all have children, we don't have children, we have nieces or nephews, like when they start to learn about art history, it won't have to be that South Asia is like, you know, 2 pages, if that, in the book. There's so many other perspectives. So this was a joy to work on. And usually art historians don't get invited into exhibitions like this. They stay in the university. Us crazy curators stay in like the fun exhibition space. It's not natural that these connections come. So this is something that makes DAS pretty unique. Then this was also interesting. So we were invited by one of our long-term collaborators, Al Serkal Avenue in Dubai, to curated an exhibition. And so we decided to do something. The show is called Fabricated Fractures, but to kind of synthesize works and ideas that had been kind of brewing since DAS 2014 and bring them all together in the show. So the show, you might recognize a lot of the work. So there's Kamruzaman's work, which he increased to scale up to hold this building. We also, we kind of played the building like an instrument. So Ritu's piece was in there also. This was a piece by Joyda Brawaja, a large-scale Alpona piece where indigenous women are kind of standing larger than life with tanks on their heads, protecting the space. This was the clothes you see there is remnants of a performance piece by Aisha Jatoy that was also in DAS. We have these Rashid Chowdhury pieces, but again, it was looking at, again, these fabricated lines that are drawn, be they ethnic, be they religious, be they political, that kind of keep the threads, you know, it's threads of difference that bring culture together, and it's those threads of difference that I think hold Bangladeshi culture together. So that's why I love Rashid Chowdhury's work so much, that it's woven by Bangladeshi people with the influence of a French wife by a Bangladeshi man, that show the history of mythology from many different religions, yet it's still Bangladeshi. I love this shot. So these are beautiful images by Ashfika Rahman, and I hope many of you will join us for our studio visit with her tomorrow. This work, Rape is Political. Next to it are works by Hitman Gurung from the Samdani collection, which are basically images of indigenous people in Nepal whose rights of identity have been taken away from them. Here you have kind of the set for Ritu's Lost Tunes. It was also interesting to think of, when this isn't a performance, how does it look like an installation? So that was another challenge, I think one that we worked on well. And I mentioned exhibition design. So I had a WhatsApp group that I was very active on, and it was called Mud Floor Fantasies. So I really wanted a mud floor in this show. And I wanted a mud floor in the show because I felt like the space was too cold. It was too heavy to kind of carry these stories of fragility. So that is what you're seeing on the floor here. And it was interesting, like just a process to see how the way that you build a space through an exhibition design, which again is a separate skill from curating. I am not an exhibition designer. I work with exhibition designers, but can bring a different feel to the audience experience as they move through artworks. Here again, you see Jakai's work, which you saw in another slide. You see Munim Wasif's work from his 2016 solo project. You see Shilpa Gupta's floor piece from 2014. You see Kanak Chappa's piece, which we showed in DS 2018. So it's interesting to see that actually all these ideas are pretty connected. And I also like showing the same work. There's also works in Daca Art Summit that we've shown in many Daca Art Summits, because a work takes, when I talk about context, when I was saying why so many international artists, it was about creating a context. But now my approach is different. Point is that the reading of the artworks changes based on the context in which you put it. Okay, so now we go to Daca Art Summit 2020. So if DAS 2018 was looking at these spaces between South and Southeast Asia, we had that huge earthquake in Nepal during this period. And I started thinking about, actually, all of these borders changed, right? Like at one point you could walk from Antarctica to Australia into India, right? Like geologically, you can find, like, so the fossils that you saw in Adrian's piece are found in Nepal. They're also found in Morocco. They're also found in Argentina. Like, the face of the planet shifted, and it'll continue to shift. So the image on the right is there's a theory, because, you know, every day the Earth's plates are shaking. Every day they're moving. There's an earthquake or a volcano happening all the time. So maybe one day the plates will rejoin. Don't know, but, like, you know, it's a theory. So thinking about that, when you start thinking about all of these things moving, borders become less and less important, right? Because they were kind of geologically and politically made. And so thinking around this work was something that kind of spiraled other thoughts. So for example, there's this work back here with the videos behind Madiha Sikandar's Clove Curtain. This was a work that I encountered in Dakar in Senegal on a research trip, and it was called the Seismography of Struggle. So a seismograph is a machine that measures earthquakes, but humans can make turbulence too, right? Like if we think of right now Black Lives Matter, if we thought of the language movement, if we think of abolition movements to end slavery, but this was the first time that I saw the word seismograph used with a human term. So when you get the seismography of the earth and you get the seismography of humans, that's kind of where my head clicked. And also remember there were tons of protests happening in Bangladesh at the time. So between that and this, that's where that kind of idea for seismic movements came. And the idea for Shoncharon came, I'm pronounced, my Bangla is horrible, as you know, but Shoncharon came from sitting with Ruxmini, Nurul Khan, Nafiz Bai, like a group of people in Hong Kong, and trying to think of what would be a poetic way to kind of express this. And it was interesting because Shoncharon could be a virus, Shoncharon could be wisdom, Shoncharon could be love, Shoncharon could be wind, could be your blood circulation system. But I think this summit is kind of a form of Shoncharon, right? Like these ideas and connections and friendships that are just kind of flowing all over the place in an uncontrollable way in no particular direction. So here I loved this pairing of Rashid Talukdar's images of protest in Bangladesh with this video by a Brazilian artist, Jonathan de Andrade, where he was looking at that overlay of political and geological movement. So he imagined a situation of what if the conflicts between Bolivia, Peru and Chile could just be sorted if there was an earthquake and that piece of contested land just shifted off. But it's, so it was also great to just see when you start thinking of the planet in a geological sense, you can start seeing connections across cultures that might not be anywhere geographically near each other. And so I found a lot of similarities between struggles happening in Brazil and struggles happening in Bangladesh. And but those connections don't really get made because Brazil is super far away. They speak Portuguese. There's no government trying to connect these things, but through the summit and the generosity of the Samdanis and our other partners, we are able to make these connections. And I should also say generosity of the artists, because like when Elena Damiani came from Peru, I think it was a 44-hour flight or something crazy like that. So I think a lot of artists around the world are very inspired by what they hear about Bangladesh and want to experience it firsthand. So while DAS 2014 was a journey of really trying to convince artists to come to Bangladesh, for me, DAS 2020 was more being like, whoa, I can't handle any more people. Like, I have people writing into me about Bangladesh. So what you guys have is very special. Here's Munam Wasif's a beautiful project, which you remember. This was also incredible to have Nupur and Nilima Sheikh meeting in her performance with tea. And this was also a situation where this piece first happened with me at my Freeze project. So I tried to kind of work on projects long-term, like, so rather than, again, it's practice, right? So the way that this was read in London is different from the way that this was read in Bangladesh or wherever else it might not yet go, but it was working towards something, and it's a journey that continues. Here we have Hubaishu Chowdhury's work with Dali Al-Mamun's work, which again, intergenerational pairing, but I was really quite happy with both of those projects. Shomoy group, I won't dwell on this, but we're just showing images of, you know, how I believe, and I would like to hear what you guys think about it, but DAS 2020 was a far more rooted into Bangladesh exhibition than the other ones were. And I think part of it was just the amount of time that I spent and that the team spent and that our collaborators spent in Bangladesh. Like by this time, it was Iftikhar Dadi's, I think, 3rd trip to Bangladesh. It was Cosman's maybe 5th trip to Bangladesh. It was, I don't even know how many times I've been, but it's building that familiarity and also bringing in more Bangladeshi collaborators. This to me was also a wonderful moment showing the Zainul Abidin, Shomnath Hor, and SM Sultan with Tao Nguyen Phan's piece about the Vietnam famine. Marzia Farhana's moving piece about feminism and ecocide. Shoma Shoravi Jannat's work in the Samdani Art Awards. So it's interesting where the meta title was seismic movements. You are seeing this idea of like the visitor circulation through the space. You see it here in Dali's work, right? As you navigate and as these, plates, forms are moving on top of these boxes of tea. You see it here as you circulate through the kind of environment that Marzia made. You see it here in Shoma's work, but also here with the show, The Collective Body. So again, I don't have billions of hours, but we find the artist-led initiatives in Bangladesh extremely inspiring and interesting. And how could we create a platform where artists who are building institutions could meet and also share what they've been doing with interested audiences? So this is an image of that. We also wanted to reduce the carbon footprint of the summit. So we worked with an exhibition design team who created and also Inteza was very instrumental in creating the idea for these kind of jute walls. And my team with Mobin and Asifor and Sajad were like key to executing this. But this idea that the wall could be a surface, it could be a surface or could be reused for other things, that we didn't have to have AC in here, that people could circulate in more free ways. There is no way that we could have welcomed as many visitors as we did with the kind of wall structure that we had before. So this open platform also allowed the building to accommodate more visitors. I think that Bishwajit, so when I think about seismic movements, education is a seismic movement, and we wouldn't have the strength of artists in Bangladesh that we have now were it not for the teachers. So I think Bishwajit did a great job of trying to contextualize the art that we see now by young artists with the kind of legacy of who taught them. Of course, contemporary art is also about rupture, right? It's about breaking with what you were taught, but at the same time, context is important. So I'm gonna leave you with this last slide. So if every summit, I'm thinking about different ways to look at a region or different ways to look at about Bangladesh. Right now, I'm really interested in seeing like, how do we change the frame? Could a region be about a state of mind? Could it be about a state of existence, right? Like, so for example, people in Bangladesh are suffering from COVID in a very similar way to people in you know, for example, Brazil. It's different from Europe. It's different. I'm rambling, but like, could it be, it's not geographic at this point, how we're experiencing the world. There are other ways to look at it. Could it be at states of struggle? So something else I thought was interesting was we had a conversation between Black feminist artists in Brazil and Shako about what Blackness means in South Asia and what Blackness means in Brazil. And it was very interesting, right? We also see that Unilever now, I agree with my colleague Teresa that this product should not exist, but I think it's a great sign that Unilever is changing the name of Fair and Lovely. That's a struggle, but this is something that Bangladeshis share with other parts of the world. So what does a region have to be about a nation state? Could it be about a state of mind? So where do the struggles of South Asia connect outside of what's obvious on a map? So that's kind of where my head is at the moment. And I would love to hear questions, comments from all of you.